Zach Laws of Gold Derby here with Oscar-winning sound mixer Tom Fleischman to talk about his work on Martin Scorsese's new film, The Irishman. You know, and Tom, I think what's so surprising about this film from a sound perspective is how comfortable it is just sitting in silence. Was that part of the directive from Scorsese?
Yes. It was made clear to us, that the entire sound team right from the beginning, that this was going to be a quiet, restrained movie. And there weren't going to be a lot of flashy moments, no big, huge sound sequences, plane crashes, or anything like that. That it was really about the intimacy of the character, the scenes between the characters, and to keep the quality of their voices and the performances as pure as possible with no distraction. So we wound up making this movie very quiet. It's very restrained. And that's all intentional. Mm-hmm. This was Marty's and Thelma's idea. This was his vision for the film. In fact, at the beginning, when we were first talking about it, he said that he really wanted to keep all the music mono, particularly in the early part of the film. And there was a big debate on whether there was even going to be any score. We didn't know until much later on that Robbie Robertson was going to do a score. And so in the end, that the music part of it kind of opened up a little bit. But, it's still very front and center and very narrow and very focused. And that's all intentional. I mean, it was all about the purity of those performances and the relationships between the characters and the way that they looked at one another and the way they spoke to one another and the quietness of all of that. Was very important.
It's interesting. I mean, you've worked on a lot of really sound-intensive films, and you've worked with Scorsese numerous times. Doing something like this, where it's more intended to be quiet, and sound is sort of not necessarily in the forefront. Is that more challenging for you than something like, say, Gangs of New York or The Aviator, where you have these like very kind of complicated soundscapes?
Well, in some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. Obviously, there's many, many fewer elements to the track. So there's less material to handle. So in that way, it's easier. But it's quite a bit more challenging in terms of the idea that, when you have a quiet dialogue scene between two characters in a quiet room with nothing going on, there's very little, and in spite of that, the director doesn't want to add any sound. He doesn't want to add anything that's going to distract from the performances and the relationship between the characters and the intimacy of the scene. So we didn't want to put in outside traffic. We didn't want to put in, the sound of the world around them. They were the world. Their little enclave of what's going on between them was the entire world. So, like in a scene, for example, in the restaurant, early in the film, when Frank is talking to Harvey Keitel and telling him that he, bombed out this place, and they're sitting in a quiet restaurant. There's nobody else there. There's a bartender off in the corner, and there's another guy sitting in the booth behind them. And they were really particular and adamant that we put in nothing, no activity off screen that would distract from the intimacy of that scene between the three characters sitting at the table. So there was a number of scenes that played that way. And then, obviously there's some violence, there's some, murders that happen. But those are all very fast. They all happen very quickly, and they're very simple. There's nothing complicated about it. It's just a couple of gunshots and bam, it's over. And, the car drives away or the person walks off down the street. So, in that sense, it's a very unusual kind of movie for Marty. As you say, there are many other movies where he's made extensive use of sound effects and overlapping dialogue and, layered sound. But not this one. This one, it was, the whole concept of it was to keep it really, really simple.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think to your point, when you hear those gunshots, it's so jarring because for long stretches of the film, you know, it is just dialogue and very little other outside ambient sound, if at all. And so in a way, it almost makes those moments of violence feel more impactful. Was that part of the thinking as well?
Yes, I think so. I think that was, you know, they're also very simple. You know, the gunshots aren't great big, you know, cannon type guns. They're little snub-nosed 38s. You know, it's a pop, pop. It's not even really. I mean, there's one scene where Dorfman's car gets shot up, and that's a kind of interesting montage there, because that's one of the areas in the film where the sound really takes off. You know, there's music through a lot of this, and in that scene, you know, he pulls his car out of the garage, and suddenly there's all the music stops, and there's the, you know, flurry of gunshots. His car gets shot up, and he's left like sitting in the car and quiet. Everything gets very quiet. We hear the car drive off, and boom, he's gone. And then suddenly the music blasts in with Johnny Ray, you know, singing "Cry," like boom, loud, and it cuts to a shot of the car being picked up by a plane dropped. Mm-hmm. So, you know, those kind of juxtapositions of quiet and suddenly, you know, quick, fast, loud violence. Yes, it does help punctuate those moments. So I guess that was the idea.
And I think the silence also works to help build suspense in a lot of key areas. I mean, you mentioned that restaurant scene, and it's very tense when you see it, you know, because you're thinking like, what's going to happen to him after this? Certainly there's other moments in the movie that I don't want to spoil where that silence really helps, I think, build that suspense and keep you on the edge of your seat. I mean, is that something that, I mean, because obviously a lot of the times, you know, we're used to hearing things like little monotones or big bings or things like that, you know, to kind of give us jumps or keep us on the edge of our seats. So was using silence in that way part of the design as well?
Well, I guess, you know, in terms of those quiet scenes, you know, it was really more about the intimacy between the characters and keeping the audience focused on their relationships. It's all of those scenes have to do with the relationships between the characters. So even in those scenes, some of them have music, some of them don't. The ones that have music, the music is kept very quiet. And it's just a way of trying to get the audience to focus in on what's being said and how it's being said and what it means to these guys. You know, what's the underlying conversation that's really taking place when they're talking about these things. So I guess that, you know, that's really was the concept there.
Right. You've worked with Scorsese a number of different times. What is that relationship like? And I mean, what does he do as a director that helps you do your best work?
Well, I think, you know, we have a long working relationship. It goes back to, you know, the early 1980s. So, you know, and I've worked on all of his films since then. And it's been a fantastic relationship for me. I mean, he just inspires me. He brings out the best in me, and I really feel privileged to be working with him. I mean, he's an amazing filmmaker. His mind is like a steel trap. He remembers everything. He knows exactly what he wants, and he won't stop until he gets there. You know, sometimes we spend hours and hours and hours on a simple little scene just trying to work out a musical transition. Moving the music, a frame here, a frame there, trying to make things work a little bit better. And, you know, it's a wonderful thing. I always enjoy it. He's very funny, and he's a great raconteur. And, but he's always focused on the work and on, you know, on making sure he gets it right.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, in working on all those movies, you've also worked with Thomas Schoonmaker, obviously, very close. So I'm assuming that must be a close relationship as well.
Oh, yes, yes. Thelma's, you know, it's almost like they're I kind of feel like they're kind of like one entity when they're working together on a film, because they're both focused on telling that story, getting it right, getting it, the way that the music is juxtaposed with the cuts, the picture cuts, and with the dialogue, the lines of dialogue, and if there's voiceover, the way that the voiceover flows with what the underlying track is, whether it's music or dialogue, sync dialogue. It's amazing the way they put those sequences together. I'm thinking about Goodfellas and Casino, all the movies where you've got the voiceover working with music, working with dialogue, working with sound effects. And at any given moment, there's always one thing that's the most important thing, and it's a matter of finding those balances throughout the sequence. It's really a challenge and really a lot of fun. And when it comes together, you know it. I mean, once you get it, it's got, because you can feel it.
Yeah. And it's interesting watching this movie in the context of the filmography that they've built up. And certainly the filmography Scorsese's built up since his very first movie going to this one, the confidence and the ease with which he directs this film. As someone who has worked with him on all of his movies for, over almost 40 years now, how would you say this one holds up to his other works?
Oh, I think it holds up wonderfully. I think it's one of the best films he's ever made, frankly. That's my opinion. I mean, just the way that film affected me when I first saw it is very rare. Very rare that a film would affect me that deeply. So I knew that he was, really, he's always emotionally invested in his work, I think. He takes his work very, seriously and very personally. So the movies all have something in it that's really, really special to him. And in this film, it really, really comes through. It's a long film, but it's always engaging. It never lets up. And if you can watch it all the way through from beginning to end, I think the cumulative effect of the story at the end is really, it's shattering. It's so powerful.
Yeah. You've already been recognized by the Cinema Audio Society for your work on this film, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're also an Oscar winner for Hugo. You've been nominated a number of different times. What does that kind of recognition mean for you? And for this film in particular, which I think it can be very easy to overlook the sound work on something this quiet and intimate, but obviously, your fellow sound mixers have nominated it as one of the 5 best mixed films of the year. So clearly they know what they're talking about. What does that recognition mean for you?
It means the world to me. To get that kind of recognition, particularly on a film this simple and this quiet and this sort of restrained, is to me amazing. I was not expecting it. And the fact that it's been recognized by the CAS is fantastic. I think it really warms my heart, and I'm very grateful because I know how much work went into it. It seems very simple, but it took a tremendous amount of work to get that mix the way it is. When you have a situation where you're in quiet places and rooms and there's nothing in the background, nothing to mask any of the changes in production tones from one shot to another, to get it to play the way it does was a big challenge.
Yeah. Well,
I'm really happy that it was recognized. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your work. It's a fantastic film. Definitely one of the very best that you guys have produced in your long working collaborations. And it was really a pleasure talking to you about it.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.